Mercury Chrysler. Woo, we're back with another one. I bet you're anxiously waiting for the next upload because it is a Christmas special. So today we'll be looking at something that references one of my older videos, relatively older because I've only been making videos for so long, but this is the Colt SMG 633. Now the 633, hop right into the history of it, was originally designed during the Civil War by the Confederate Army. The M16A3, which was one of the weapons that was implemented later in the war by the Confederates, was very well regarded. It was a very well liked gun, but it was a little bit bulky for cavalry troops and backline artillerymen, and they needed carbines to kind of supplement. So Marcel, the guy who designed the M16A3, he kind of just like disappeared because they couldn't find him in the phone book. So they had to go to their own design commission to kind of design this cavalry carbine. And the original thought was chamber it in a smaller round, something that would be more controllable, with a lower rate of fire for those backline troops and cavalry units. So what they ended up trying to create was this SMG 633. However, the issue they had with it was the 633 was supposed to be the rate of fire. But that didn't turn out so well because they didn't have Marcel to contact to try to make the weapon design. So when they converted it to this smaller caliber and got rid of the gas system, as you can probably tell, there's no gas system there to help assist. They figured that would help out with the jamming of the gun with the black powder. But as soon as Marcel left, they didn't really know how to reduce the fire rate, so it ended up being 1000 and not 633 like they wanted to for this cavalry carbine. So the Confederate Army, they're kind of a little worried that this fire rate's going to be too high, and it is a little bit too high for a cavalry carbine. Doesn't really have a super effective range for what it's supposed to do, which isn't a huge issue because it's not a frontline infantry weapon, but it is a small issue that they came across, and they wanted to improve it. The SMG 633, as the Confederates call it, eventually ends up in Union hands because, the Union won the war. America's the greatest country on earth, so of course we did. And the Union Army picks it up, and they see the fire rate as an issue, the 1000 rounds per minute, and they don't really see an effective role that this gun could play, especially with black powder, making it jam a lot, making the action not as reliable as it could be. It just wasn't really something that the Union was interested in, so they put it back into storage. Now this gun comes up later. So World War I, I know I'm jumping ahead a few years, but World War I comes around 1918. Again, the MP18/I gets implemented by the Germans to great effect, and the Colt company, which had bought the rights to the firearm from the U.S. government, they're looking at this gun. They're thinking like, hey, this might be something that we could use. The only issue is all the submachine guns in the interwar period and the prolific MP18/I have much lower fire rates. So they don't know how to fix the fire rate issue because they had also lost contact with Marcel. They still couldn't find him in the phone book. He was probably dead at that point. So for years and years, they're trying to figure this out. So eventually World War II rolls around, and there's some countries that are using submachine guns that have much higher fire rates than some of the other interwar period weapons. So Colt starts looking at this again, and they think, well, we might be able to make some changes, because they also had access to the M16A3 design, so they could maybe lower the fire rate that way, or just implement like some sort of drum magazine. But because of the way that the magwell is shaped, they couldn't really implement a drum magazine like lots of the high fire rate submachine guns had at the time. So it's still looked at, it's still worked on, but a 33 round, 1,000 round or round per minute submachine gun isn't what the US is looking for at the time, because they were already producing Thompson submachine guns, and then into the much more cost-effective M3 grease guns, and much later in the war, 1945, M3A1 grease guns. They don't really need it. So Colt goes out and they contact the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union had just lost an embarrassing battle against the Finnish, where they had kind of copied the KP-31 submachine gun and made it the PPD-40. So Colt offers some of these design elements of the high rate of fire of this machine pistol to the Soviets, and the Soviets look at it, and maybe they might have implemented some of it into the design of the PPSH-41, which could much better accommodate a drum magazine. But later in the war, they found that drum magazines are very heavy, they're very bulky, hard to carry, super loud, and they decide to but they decide to adopt some smaller magazine, 35 round magazines for the PPSH-41. So Colt looks at this gun again, and it's got a 32 round magazine, which is sufficient for what the Soviets had adopted. So they're thinking, hey, maybe we could put this up into US weapon trials, but the cost of manufacture for this gun with the milled receiver and everything, it wasn't going to fly at the time period. It wasn't going to be a very effective tool for the US government just because of the cost of manufacturing. So it wasn't until after the war, the US is still happy with the M3A1 grease gun after World War II. So they still won't look at Colt's design. Eventually, Korean War comes. M3A1 is starting to get a little bit dated, but it is still in use. Then Vietnam, another proxy war, happens, and the US government is starting to look for some shorter carbine versions of their M16 and M16A1 variants that were standard issue rifles at the time. So Colt presents this gun, and it is converted into 5.56 by 45mm NATO, and it is adopted under the name, I forget the name of it, but I'll put it on screen right now. Anyhow, that gun gets used by Special Forces troops as like a short carbine, and it's relatively well liked. It's got a really high rate of fire, and that design is eventually adopted into tank rolls as well, as like a port gun type of thing. Very uncontrollable in general, without like any sort of compensation or significant compensation. So it's not a popular gun. Well, it is a popular gun in some roles, but it's not the most efficient submachine gun. So Colt still has the 9mm, or they don't have the 9mm, but they do have the smaller pistol caliber version that they decide to put into 9mm and present to the US government again after the M16 is adopted, because lots of the parts are interchangeable, like the some of the trigger, firing group control stuff is interchangeable with the M16. So around Christmas time in the 1980s, one of those Christmases, the US government decides to spend more money on the military, because that's what we do. We're the best country on earth. And they adopt the Colt 633 in small numbers with the 9mm magazines. And just around that time, a lot of polymer magazines, not a lot of polymer magazines, but some polymer magazines start coming out, which makes it a much more cost-effective weapon to produce with the polymer magazines in the gun. And the thing with polymer is that if the feed lips get broken, they're not going to get bent. So if the magazine breaks, you know it's broken, whereas with aluminum or steel magazines, the steel can bend, So you can have a faulty magazine that you don't know is faulty until you're firing it. So plastic has a benefit in that role. So this was kind of a Christmas vehicle for Colt. They got a lot of contracts with this, along with the a lot of manufacturing contracts for the M16. And really, it's a decent gun in Phantom Forces too. Really shines at close range, some hip fire capabilities. You really want to put some sort of recoil mitigation device because it does have a very high muzzle rise when you're firing it, or fired in bursts, whereas the camera shake is pretty significant. So overall, it's not the most effective Phantom Forces gun, but I would recommend using it at close quarters with maps like Metro. Metro would be a good map for this gun. Anyhow, that's just about the whole history of the 633 submachine gun, Colt 666 submachine gun. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a Merry Chrysler. Happy holidays. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. I need engagement. Please give me engagement. And if I hit 400,000 subscribers by the end of the month, I will end my own life.
I've got a little Christmas story. I'm sorry, but it's sad.